If Mayor Pete is not progressive, the goalposts for progressivism have shifted so far left.
We know that climate change is very real.
Climate approaching the point of no return.
Healthcare is a human right, not a privilege.
That goal we share of universal health care.
I believe that we should make public colleges and universities tuition free.
Well, I do have a way to make college free for almost everybody.
We need to reform our electoral system.
I think that the Electoral College has run its course.
The idea that he's not progressive is preposterous. Barack Obama would have been seen as a right-wing radical based on some of the views he had.
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged.
An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
Howdy, and welcome to this free-for-all Friday broadcast edition of Focal Point on American Family Radio. The program is Focal Point. I am Brian Fisher, your congenial, convivial, and amiable host.
As always.
Jeff
and
Reed.
Sometimes effervescent.
Did I not say effervescent?
Yeah, you left off effervescent.
Well, I am effervescent, especially today, because I get to take my best girl out to Valentine's Day dinner this afternoon. And so anyway, I am effervescent today. Hope you're having a happy Valentine's Day. Good to have you in the conversation today. Very quickly, go to afr.net. Oh, the number, by the way, if you want to get in the front of the queue, the number right now, the number today is 888-589-8840. That's 888-589-8840 is the number. Get in the queue. We'll take as many calls as we can today during the program. 888-589-8840. AFR.net. You can get podcasts of Focal Point. If you happen to miss the program live, pick it up later. You can subscribe to our podcast there. Go to AFR.net, find the podcast button, scroll down to find the Focal Point logo. Also, I do a daily commentary that airs on our network. You can get the podcast for that. It's called the Life and Liberty Minute, 60-second podcast, easy to listen to in a big hurry. So you can find all of that there. The email address is focalpoint@afa.net, focalpoint@afa.net. And at afa.net is our opinion site. I got a brand new column up there in praise of Bloomberg's stop and frisk. Probably not going to have time to talk about it in detail. We've mentioned it before. But Michael Bloomberg is apologizing all over the place for stop and frisk. I'm arguing that it was a great policy and that it was not racist, number one, and it was a great policy for minorities because it made their neighborhoods crime-free. Who loves his young children, just like I did, just like you did. When Israel was a child, God said, I loved him. And out of Egypt I called my son. That's a reference to the deliverance from Egypt under Moses. Also a messianic prophecy. This word ultimately fulfilled in Christ, who was called from Egypt. Remember, Mary and Joseph fled to Egypt for safety. God called them back through an angel to the promised land. Out of Egypt I have called my only begotten son. But then what Hosea observes is the more that God summoned them, the more that he sought them, the more that they invited them, the more that he sought to draw them to himself, the more they pushed him away. Bible says the more they were called, the more they went away. They started avoiding the sound of the Lord's voice. And God says, look, this is unfortunate because I was the one who taught Ephraim to walk. I took him up by their arms, lifted them up by their arms, like we did as fathers, swinging our children in a circle. God did that with Ephraim, but they did not know that I was the one who healed them. I healed them. It was I who did that, but they thought it was doctors. They thought it was medicine. They thought it was their own bodies, not realizing that God was the one who had created their human bodies. So they did not give God credit for the work that he was doing to heal them and to provide for them. God says, I led them with cords of kindness, literally the cords of man, and with bands of love I bent down to them and I fed them. So it's like a good dad teaching his son to walk, picking him up by the arms and swinging him in a circle, healing him when he was sick, even when they didn't realize that their healing ultimately came from God. It says, I bent down to their level to give them treats. I kept them on a gentle leash. It was with kindness that I guided them. And that was for their benefit, so they didn't wander off and hurt themselves. But, he says in verse 5, they have refused to return to me. Even though God could see that it would lead to their own destruction because they wouldn't listen to him, because they think they're so much smarter than I am, they will be devoured, God says, because of their own counsels. My people are bent on turning away from me. And he says, look, they're going to get so far away from me that they will get beyond my reach. Though they call out to the Most High, he will not raise them up at all. Now, it kills God to do this. This is what Hosea is at pains to say, look, it kills God to do this. It breaks his heart to do this. You know, we don't think about this. We don't think about the impact of our transgressions on the heart of God. He's not a distant, cold, or heartless, or ruthless God, the way we can tend to think about him. He is a God of compassion, and it kills him to watch us suffer. He's ready to cause his judgment to fall on us, but his own spirit causes him to hold off, even after we deserve it. Verse 8, how can I give you up, O Ephraim? How can I hand you over, O Israel? My heart recoils within me. I just cannot bring myself to judge you. You know, a lot of people think God's in a hurry to judge. He's just looking for opportunities to squash us like little tiny bugs. Hosea says, no, God's not that way at all. His compassion causes him to recoil from judging us. And so he says in verse 9, I will not execute my burning anger. I will not again destroy Ephraim, for I am God and not a man, the Holy One in your midst, and I will not come in wrath. So God says, look, I have way more patience than men do. I have way more patience with you than any man would have. The average man would have gotten so teed off with you by now that he would have let you have it, but I am God and not a man. I think this is the biggest mistake that we make when we think about God. We mistake his compassion for weakness or inattentiveness or lack of care. When we sin and get away with it, we think it's either because God doesn't exist or that he's not strong enough to do anything about it, or he just doesn't care. Doesn't bother him that much. But if judgment does not fall on us immediately, it's only because God's heart is warm toward us. You know, when we sin, we deserve judgment on the spot. If we don't get it on the spot, it's only because God's heart is warm toward us, and he longs to save us, not to judge us. He longs to redeem us, not to punish us. He wants to reclaim us and not destroy us. And so God says, eventually my people will come back to me. They will understand that when I roar as a lion, it's simply me calling them home. I'm not roaring as a lion to frighten them. I'm roaring as a lion because they've gotten so far away from me. I have to roar like a lion for them to hear me, and that's the way I'm calling them back to myself. They'll realize they don't have to be afraid of me, God says. The day will come. They don't have to be afraid of returning to me. I want them to come to me so that I can rebuild their lives. I can rebuild their families. They will come to me in humility, their will broken, but they will come to me because they will see that I want to use my strength and my power to love on them, to protect them, and to rebuild them. This is what Hosea says. They shall go after the Lord. He will roar like a lion, and when he roars, his children shall come trembling from the rest, because they know that Aslan is not a tame lion, so they shall come trembling from the west. They shall come trembling like birds from Egypt, like doves from the land of Assyria. and I will return them to their homes, declares the Lord. So maybe that's you today. Maybe you, somebody I'm talking to right now, maybe you have been running from God. Maybe you're so far away you don't know if you can get back. You don't know if God will receive you. But maybe today is the day to come trembling back to the Lion of Judah and realize that he wants to use his fearsome power to help you and not to hurt you. Well, let's take these things, if you would be kind enough to join me, and go to prayer. Lord Almighty, as we read the words of your prophet Hosea to the people of his day, we are prompted to confess our own sins as a nation and pray for your mercy over our land. We confess that merchants in our land use dishonest scales and love to defraud. We acknowledge that we often boast of our riches and our wealth, and through our wealth we have become blind to our own iniquity and sin. We confess that we have been unruly against you, even against you as the faithful Holy One. We have surrounded you with lies and deceit and bitterly provoked you to anger. It would be just for you to repay us for our contempt for you. We confess that the more you have called us, the further we have gone from you, and that often we have been determined to turn from you. But we affirm on behalf of our nation that you have loved us, that you were the one who taught us to walk, that you were the one who took us by the arms. We acknowledge that you are the one who has healed us, that you have led us with cords of human kindness and ties of love. You were the one who lifted the yoke from our neck and bent down to feed us. We pray that you will not give us up or hand us over to the enemy. May your heart toward us be changed. May your compassion be aroused toward us. We pray that you will not carry out your fierce anger or turn and devastate us as we deserve. We pray instead that you will change our hearts so that we will follow you, and that you will roar as a lion, that we as your children may come trembling to you. We beg for your favor and pray that you will talk with us as you talked with Jacob at Bethel. Please cause us to return to you as our God. Work by your Spirit that we may maintain love and justice and wait for you always. This we ask in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, well, that number again, if you want to join the conversation today, it's Free for All Friday. So the ground rules are pretty simple. You can talk about anything that you want that's been in the news this week. It's got to be sort of a current event. We got pretty broad parameters today. Whatever you want to talk about, we invite you to join the conversation. Glad to have you. The number is 888-589-8840. 888-589-8840 is the number to call. Now, as we glide to the end of our first segment, let me look at a couple of, this is kind of a heartwarming story. Here's a family in Houston. Their dog went missing, get this, 14 years ago. A little Yorkie, a 5-pound Yorkshire Terrier mix. And I've had some good friends that have had Yorkies as pets. They love those dogs. This dog, they lost track of this dog 14 years ago, but they had microchipped this dog. It turned up in Fort Worth. The Animal Control Center in Fort Worth, Texas, got control of the dog, and the microchip linked them to the family in Houston. They reconnected this little dog called Remy to his original family. He had a wound on his face, he had hair loss, and he had no teeth, but that didn't matter to the family with whom he was reunited. A couple of quick things on the AFA front. Got a couple of town hall promotions, a couple of town halls coming up. Next week in Harrisburg, Virginia, February 20th. The title of the town hall is Living the Gospel During Difficult Times. Abraham Hamilton III will be there, Walker Wildman will be there, and Rob Chambers will be there. That's at the Sheraton Harrisburg Hershey Hotel. You can go to afa.net/events and register. afa.net/events, room for 500, but I want to make sure they got enough room for everybody. You got to register. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
And you will know the truth. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. Actor Jussie Smollett.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
Howdy, and welcome back to Focal Point on American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. You are listening to Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on Conservative Talk Radio. Great to have you in the conversation. And Jeff, you have a kind of a neat little story to bring to us for the Reed Report today. So let's throw it to Jeff Reed for today's Reed Report. Take it away.
You know, we hear a lot of complaints about technology, but every once in a while something comes out that's just really cool. And this was actually invented by an engineer that's visually impaired named Kursik Seelan. He invented a cane for the visually impaired that includes built-in speakers, voice assistants, you know, like a Google Home or Alexa, Google Maps, and a Bluetooth system, and combined all those to where now people can actually be told what direction they're going, they have sensors on buses now that they can tell. In a lot of big cities, you have bus stops where multiple buses come up, and they can't tell which bus is their bus. So now they'll be able to tell. Also, there's a sensor in it that sends out a signal for anything that is head height or chest height, which has been a disadvantage for people with canes because they can detect things at ground level. But sometimes there's signs and different things hanging over. This is going to help them out tremendously.
Ah, fantastic. Cool deal. You know, in our city here in Washington, at the corners, they have these beeping sounds in the crosswalk monitors for the blind, for those that are visually impaired. So you have, you know, for those that can see, they got the normal guy walking or the guy of the hand with the rays and all that. But for people that can't see that, they've got these little beeping sounds. So if you know how to interpret them, you know when it's clear to walk and when you need to hold off. But man, this is way better than that when you got somebody talking to you about what way to go. Very quickly, a couple of other stories before we start taking phone calls. You know, the Bible says, Romans 1 says, that those that engage in sexual immorality dishonor or devalue their own bodies. In other words, sexual immorality eventually begins to take a toll on your physical body. Here's a story out of the UK that reveals that the higher number of sexual partners somebody has, the higher the odds of a limiting long-term condition like cancer. This is found particularly in people who have 10 or more sexual partners throughout their lifetime. You know, when you think about the homosexual community, the homosexuals on average have hundreds. I am not exaggerating this. They have hundreds of sexual partners in a lifetime, so it's no wonder that they have conditions toward the end of their life that are very debilitating. Just kind of an information piece. Got several stories here about the rise of witchcraft. Here's one from The Atlantic, which is a liberal talking snake media outlet, not conservative at all, talking about the rise of witchcraft and demonic possession. Here's a story from Harrisburg, Virginia, about a modern-day exorcist in Harrisburg, Virginia, of all places. They got enough people that are demonized there. That's the term I use. They're demonized. It's not that the demons have them, it's that they have the demons. They've done something to invite these demons into their life, and then there they are. And they're in there. And it takes an exorcist to get them out. Back in 2011, this story says, this is from the ABC affiliate in Harrisburg, there were 15 exorcists in America. This is in the Roman Catholic tradition. 15 exorcists in 2011. Today, there are over 100. And they go to yearly conferences. They even go to Rome every 2 years to get more training in how to deliver people from demonic possession. He says, one of the examples I dealt with, a man was possessed. It took 4 fully grown men to hold this person down. Remember, we saw that in the Gospels. The guy could not be contained with chains, kept breaking the chains. So that's an example, or it's a manifestation of demonic invasion. Another client did not know Latin, but answered the priest's question fluently in Latin. So demons can mimic the gift of languages. That's why we have to be very careful with that gift. And then there was a girl who was hospitalized because when they had tranquilized her, they stepped outside and it didn't work. So they stepped outside to consult with each other. When they came back in the room, she was literally climbing the wall like Spider-Man. This is on an ABC affiliate in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So demonization is a very real thing. We're going to see more and more people dealing with this. Here's a story out of Pueblo, Colorado. Police got a call at 3:30 in the morning to a McDonald's, 3:30 in the morning in Pueblo, Colorado. And employees told officers that they heard screams. They heard demonic sounds outside the restaurant coming from a screaming woman. They heard someone speaking in a strange language, and they heard this woman barking. And they were so spooked by it that they wouldn't even leave the building. 3:30 in the morning, they stayed inside. They locked themselves inside until the police showed up, wouldn't come out of the building until the sun came up. Now, of course, the truth is they did not need to be afraid. This woman was obviously demonized, but they had the power and the authority in Jesus Christ to wade right into that situation, rebuke that demon, and compel it to be silent and to stop troubling the woman. But the Christians are so woefully instructed. I mean, I've seen it in my own experience. Even pastors get so spooked by the idea, they won't even touch it. So they may have demonized people in their own churches, but they cannot help them because they will not take seriously what the Bible teaches us about demons and what they can do to saints. In Kenya, farmers are being traumatized by biblically sized swarms of locusts. We've talked about this before. There are some parts of Kenya where entire fields of crops are being destroyed by these locusts in 30 seconds. One farmer said a week ago there were no locusts anywhere in sight. Now entire farms have been wiped out and destroyed by these locusts. All right, well, let's see if we can... Oh, by the way, one thing before I go to the phones. You know, the insanity of transgenderism continues. Here is a male that's being allowed to compete in the women's Olympic trials. He's a male. He's a marathon runner. He's so sexually confused. He's so mentally ill, so mentally disordered that he thinks he's trapped inside a woman's body, and they're allowing him to get away with this mental illness. This is enabling mental insanity, ladies and gentlemen, and he's now going to be able to run in the women's trials for the Olympic Games. You know, we've talked about this before, but if you have a guy that goes through puberty and he becomes a full-grown male and then he decides he's going to transition, let's remember that his skeletal form, his lung capacity, his muscle density, the length of the levers in his body, the muscle-to-weight ratio, their capacity to deal with dehydration, their narrower hips, I mean, you name it, those are in place. And they're not going to be changed. They're not going to go away because you put them on female hormones. So they have a built-in, lifelong, lifetime advantage. Ladies and gentlemen, that is, our whole nation is going crazy on this deal. All right, well, let's go to the phones. By the way, the Air Force is updating its dress code to include turbans, beards, hijabs, and unshorn hair. So you can wear anything you want on your head. You don't even have to cut your hair. And the Air Force will let you get away with it. You know, there's a reason why they call them uniforms. Everybody's wearing the same uniform. They look the same. It's good for esprit de corps. This is just going to look sloppy. You know, and there's a good reason for these standards for hair length and for dress, because our unity is found in, our strength is found in unity. Strength is not found in diversity. It's found in unity. Just ask any functional army on the face of the globe. I think you heard Abraham Hamilton say that Jesse Smollett has been indicted in Chicago on alleged hate crime hoax. And this tells you something. I say this all the time, but this illustrates it again. Hate crimes, ladies and gentlemen, especially race-based hate crimes, are so rare that they have to be invented. And Jesse Smollett invented one. Now he's in trouble. You might remember the New York Times did that 1619 project. They're trying to convince America that our history as a nation began in 1619 when the first slave ship came to the Jamestown colony. They don't even want us thinking about 1776. They don't want us thinking about 1776 as the year we were born. They want us to think that we were birthed in slavery, not in freedom. Nothing could be further from the truth. But they've got a lot of mushy-headed people that are buying this. They developed an entire curriculum. New York Times trying to poison the minds of every school child in America. Right now they've got this 1619 project in 3,500 classrooms in all 50 states. The entire school system in Chicago and Washington, D.C. have adopted it. There's no administrative textbook review. This is being adopted by administrative fiat, and they've got books for young readers to poison their minds and completely transform our understanding of American history. Even Henry Louis Gates Jr., remember, he was the black Harvard academic, had the big beer summit there because the police braced him because it looked like he was breaking into a house. A black guy trying to break into a house. Turns out it was his own house. They got it all cleared up and all that kind of stuff. But Henry Louis Gates says, look, what these books are leaving out is the role of African chieftains who kidnapped blacks for the slave trade. So African chieftains kidnapped blacks, then they sold them to Muslims who walked them to the coast and put them on slave ships, many of which were handled and managed by white slave traders and slave holders. Grand Central Station, majestic piece of architecture. At 5:30 in the afternoon, it becomes a homeless shelter. Restaurants there can't even stay open because the homeless people come in and sit at the tables that they need for their customers. Here's one guy paying $50,000 a month to run a Chinese restaurant in Grand Central Station, and he can't even serve people at his own restaurant. And they've got people that are hunched over on tables. They're sleeping at tables. They're sleeping on benches. They're using drinking fountains to bathe. They're walking barefoot away from food stalls in the food court and all, just horrible. And New York's not going to do anything about it. And again, I've talked about the solution. The first thing you got to do is get government out of homelessness. Get them out of it altogether. They make hash of everything they touch. Turn it over to nonprofits and churches. And the capacity you have to minister to the homeless is entirely a function of how many non-profit homeless shelters there are, because they will not only provide food and shelter, they will provide spiritual counseling, get these people right with God, encourage them to get trained so they can be responsible enough to hold down jobs. Right. Well, let's go to the phones. Let's begin with Connie in Newkirk, Oklahoma. Connie, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Hello there.
Howdy.
Thank you for your wonderful prayer at the top of the hour.
Thank you.
And also for your biblical teachings, Hosea, the books. And our radio station stays on AFR continuously. So
great to hear.
What I would like to speak about is your comments on Rush Limbaugh last week, the Freedom of Honor Medal.
Yes.
Okay.
The Presidential Medal of Freedom, yeah.
Else that the audience cannot pick up on because of his hate speech that he's given. Not so much hate, but it's the fact that he's a racist.
Okay, now give me an evidence, like a concrete thing, Connie, that demonstrates his racism. Help me understand what he has said that makes you think that he is a racist.
I certainly can, Brian, and I'm glad you asked, because this can be fact-checked. Here is a statement. He says, you know who deserves the posthumous Medal of Honor? James Earl Ray, the confessed assassin of Martin Luther King. We miss you. Godspeed.
Connie, I'm going to stop you right there.
Have riot rehearsal. They should get a liquor store and practice.
Connie, I got to stop you right there. I don't know what your source for that is, but there is no way in the world that Rush Limbaugh said anything like that. That did not come from the lips of Rush Limbaugh. So, Connie, I'm afraid you've been given some bad information about Rush Limbaugh. All right, well, let's go to Pam in Missouri. Pam in Missouri, what's on your mind? Talk to me.
The UN is trying to force 100 companies not to do business with Israel. Have you heard about this?
Oh yeah, that's the divest movement. It's on campuses where they're trying to convince basically entire companies not to do any business with Israel, not to buy Israeli products, not to sell them, not to sell their goods to the nation of Israel. Just freeze Israel out of the international market. Yeah, that movement has been going on for some time.
Yeah, well, Israel with this sickness, the disease that's spreading, the
coronavirus.
Yeah, Israel has made a mask that protects people from getting sick from that, and they actually sent free masks to different countries to help them. And yet, the UN is still trying to, stop the people from the companies from having anything to do with Israel. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, it is. And it's just wrong-headed, Pam, and I'll tell you why. The number of Nobel Prize winners in science, the nation of Israel dominates that on a per capita basis. They have more Nobel Prize winners in science per capita than any other nation on earth, including the United States. The Muslim world has the smallest per capita rate of Nobel Prize winners, none of them for science, some of them for peace. We'll be right back. Focal Point, American Family Radio. Stay with us.
Here's Twyla Braze with today's Health Freedom Minute.
California law enforcement solved a crime by tapping into the state's database of newborn DNA.
Listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Howdy and welcome back to Focal Point on American Family Radio. Brian Fisher is my name. You are listening to Focal Point, the home of the fastest 60 minutes in American media. Hitting the home stretch. Buckle up as we head for the checkered flag. Just a information item about another AFA town hall meeting. This one on faith, family, and finance in Lafayette, Louisiana, next Thursday. That's February 20th, next Thursday in Lafayette, Louisiana. Dan Celia will be there. Tim Wildman, the president of AFA, will also be there. And let's see, you can register by going to afafoundation.net. afafoundation.net. And you can register for this Faith, Family, and Finance Town Hall with Dan Celia and our own president, Tim Wildman. Encourage you to do that. Now, I want to talk about, before we get back to phone calls, talk about Pete Buttigieg just for a second. New Hampshire voters, because Pete Buttigieg talks about the scriptures, he talks about the Bible, he talks about what the Bible says about things like abortion, things like homosexuality. It's completely wrong. He's turned the Bible completely upside down, but he talks about it, and he's smooth, and he's likable, and he's articulate, and so people believe that he's a moral guy and that he's being guided by a moral compass. They love the fact that he talks about the scriptures, and that's one of the things that people in New Hampshire said they really liked about Pete Buttigieg was his moral compass. But think about this guy's moral compass. Did not come from God, came from the other guy, because his moral compass points in the direction of abortion for any reason, at any time, under any circumstances, even after a baby is born. That is Pete Buttigieg's moral compass. Remember, it was in Indiana, those 2,400 aborted babies were found in boxes. When Buttigieg was asked about that, he was the mayor in South Bend. That's where the funeral for these babies was held this week. The only thing that troubled him about it was it might interfere with women's access to abortion. That is Pete Buttigieg's moral compass. And you look at his own lifestyle, not much moral compass there. In fact, what Pete Buttigieg said, my political success as a gay man, as a homosexual, is a part, quote, of God's sense of humor. So he thinks the reason he's gone so far in his political career as a homosexual is because God has a sense of humor. Well, I think, Pete, you might want to ask Sodom and Gomorrah if homosexuality is as funny as you happen to think it is. Now, Pete Buttigieg, when he was the mayor of South Bend, he made a big deal out of dedicating and opening an LGBTQ center. Got a picture of him right here. This is from our good friend Tracy Shannon of Texas Mass Resistance. And he's cutting the ribbon, doing the ribbon cutting ceremony for this LGBTQ center. Now, here's what I want you to be aware of, because this is an LGBTQ center that Pete Buttigieg was all about. They feature all ages drag shows. Had one just last week, an all ages drag show. And Pete Buttigieg, that was at this center that he dedicated and he opened. And it's a LGBTQ center that's geared toward 12 to 18-year-olds. They had karaoke parties and pizza parties. Our youth group karaoke pizza party. The fun begins at 7 p.m. The LGBTQ Center open to ages 12 through 18. So Pete Buttigieg is all about drag shows for all ages, featuring drag performers that are often sexual prostitutes on the side, and they want to open their center for pizza parties for teens between the ages of 12 and 18. So this is a big, giant recruiting effort. This LGBTQ center that Pete Buttigieg opened, it's just a recruiting center for young teenagers to get recruited into homosexuality and get recruited into transgenderism. You know, and you want to know what he'd want to do to education as president? He would want required curriculum in every school that advanced the normalization of the LGBTQ entire agenda. That's what he would do as president. We don't want this guy anywhere near the White House. In fact, what you'd have is if Pete Buttigieg becomes president, we may have drag queen shows in the White House. That would not be beyond the realm of possibility. So if you like the thought of drag queen shows in the White House, Pete Buttigieg is your man. If you think that's the moral compass that ought to be guiding America's understanding of sexuality, then Pete Buttigieg is your guy. And about this center, there's a picture of Pete Buttigieg. This is the About Us page at this LGBTQ center. It's got a picture of Pete Buttigieg kissing his so-called husband on the lips, and the center is described as something that's dedicated to the promotion of LGBTQ plus experiences and inclusivity. So you want those kind of things taking place in the White House, Pete Buttigieg is your guy. And thank you to Tracy Shannon of Texas Mass Resistance for doing the research on that. Now, Pete Buttigieg, everybody wants to try to say that he is a centrist. But listen to clip number 2. Not a progressive. Pete Buttigieg is part of the center lane. He's a centrist in the Democratic Party. He's a centrist. He's a harmless guy. He runs right down the middle of the lane, right down the center stripe in the highway. Don't have to worry about him. He is not a radical. Well, let's listen to clip 1 first. Pete Buttigieg is just as much a socialist as the burner. He's just a mini me for Bernie Sanders. Clip number 1, you will hear Pete Buttigieg, you'll hear Bernie Sanders talking, and then the second half of the clip, you will hear Pete Buttigieg talking. Let's listen.
We know that climate change is very real and an existential crisis for our planet. Healthcare is a human right, not a privilege.
I believe that we should make public colleges and universities tuition free. So we need to reform our electoral system.
A climate approaching the point of no return. That goal we share of universal health care.
Well, I do have a way to make college free for almost everybody.
I think that the Electoral College has run its course.
All right, so there's Pete Buttigieg. He's running neck and neck with Bernie Sanders in the progressive, I call it the regressive lane. They're so mixed up they want to take us backwards. They call themselves progressives like they're about progress. They're not. They're going in reverse. They are regressives. So Pete Buttigieg is not a centrist when it comes to climate change, when it comes to health care being a universal right, when it comes to free college, and when it comes to getting rid of the electoral college system. Now here's Willie Geist, clip number 2. He's one of the talking heads on Joe Scarborough's morning program, and he says the thought that Pete Buttigieg is a centrist is ridiculous on its face. Clip 2.
If Mayor Pete is not progressive, the goalposts for progressivism have shifted so far left. I mean, if you would talk about him in 2008, Barack Obama would have been seen as a right-wing radical based on some of the views he has. If the frame is Bernie Sanders, if the frame is Elizabeth Warren, I guess Mayor Pete's not as progressive, but the idea that he's not progressive is preposterous.
Preposterous to think that he's running down the center lane. All right, let's grab some calls. Let's begin with Brian in Columbus, Ohio. Brian, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Hey, I just have a question, hopefully that you can clear it up. Last week, you and a couple gentlemen was talking about the impeachment of about Donald Trump being so great. And my question is that he committed 2 adulteries, and he's got caught on the radio bragging about touching women in places that he shouldn't be touching. And then you're going and saying that he's a great president and he's a great person. Now, what makes you even think that this would be something that God would want you to be talking about?
Well, let me ask you this question, Brian. That's a good question. I commend you for the question. But have you ever, now these things that we're talking about happened 14, 13 years ago. And to my knowledge, Trump has not repeated any of those behaviors. So I guess the first question for you, do you think it is possible for people to change and begin behaving in ways that they didn't in the past? Is that possible? And could that be true for Donald Trump?
Well, sir, it is very possible because God can change anybody.
Okay, well, let's just stop right there, Brian. You're admitting that it is possible. Now, here's the second thing. Have you ever heard me, and do you have any evidence, any hard evidence that he's repeated any of those behaviors in, say, the last 12 years?
Well, sir, he's lied over and over and over, and not only that.
Wait, hold it, Brian. Wait. We got to stay on topic here. You were talking about his adultery and his sexual assaults. Do you have any evidence that he's committed adultery in the last 12 years, that he's been guilty of sexual assault in the last 12 years? Do you have any evidence of that?
But is it right? Yeah. My question to you, is it right for you to get on air and tell people how great he is when
Okay, 2 things. I'm sorry, I got to interrupt you, Brian, because we're short on time. We get other people who want to get on the air. But number 1, have you ever heard me defend anything that Donald Trump did in those areas?
Yes, last week.
No. Have you ever heard me say with Donald Trump, hey, that's not that big a deal. That's no big thing. Adultery's not a bad thing. Sexual assault is not a bad thing. We need to give Trump a pass on that. Have you ever heard me say anything remotely like that? And the answer would be no.
Yes,
I have been consistently critical.
No, I did.
I have been consistently critical of Donald Trump's behavior at that time in his life. These are quotes from me. I have called it a tawdry. I've called that behavior sordid. I've called that behavior reprehensible, and I've linked Donald Trump to that behavior. That's inexcusable behavior for a man. But it's important to understand that he did that then. People can be different. You know, Paul called himself the chief of sinners, the foremost of sinners. But when God got hold of him, he wasn't the foremost of sinners any longer. He still carried that with him. So anyway, Brian, I have been consistently critical of Donald Trump's behavior. I've never given him a pass for the stuff that he did back 13, 14 years ago. But I do believe he's a different guy than he was back in those days. Does he have personality quirks? Do I approve of all of his personality quirks? No, I don't. But is he doing a great job as president? You look at his policies, Brian. He is the most pro-life president we've ever had. He's appointing constitutionalists to the federal judiciary at all levels, and he is a fierce advocate and defender of religious freedom. He's the best friend, according to Bibi Netanyahu, the best friend that Israel has ever had in the White House. And those are the things that I was talking about last week when I commended him. All right, Brian, I appreciate your call. We need to move on. Let's go to Laura in Eddy, Texas. Laura, welcome. What's on your mind? Talk to me.
Hi, Brian. Also, at the National Prayer Breakfast, Trump also said, I'm learning. I'm still learning. So just to your point to the other guy, I just wanted to tell you real quick about an incident that happened to me today on an elevator. We were at the hospital, and there were these two elderly people, a man and a woman. They both had walkers, and they were on the elevator, and the man had a shiny NRA cap on. And I walk in, and I had a coat on, but I had my Trump shirt on. And so I said, oh, I like your cap. I said, I bet you like my shirt. And I opened my coat, and the man said, I wish I had a gun. I mean, he was like in his 90s. And I was like, well, how rude, you know? And so that's all the exchange of the conversation. But I just go, well, how rude, you know? And anyway, I just had to tell you about that. I love your show. I love you and Debbie, and I'll let you go on that. I know you want to get to some other calls.
All right. Thank you, Laura, very much. I appreciate that. And there is no age limit on the Second Amendment. All right. Let's go to Nadia in Mount Carmel, Illinois. Nadia, what's on your mind? Talk to me.
Hey, sir. I first want to compliment you on your rock music. I love Christian rock music.
Okay, good.
And I want to say something about the new way forward, which is actually the new way backward.
Oh, yeah.
And I am a first-generation American. I am very loyal to my original country, too, Romania, and I love it, but the thing is, the Democrats, most of them are almost all of them are either socialists or communists. And this bill is just one way to get people in disarray and into a mess and make them say, oh my goodness, we need the government to help us, and the government steps in and takes over and oppresses.
Well, what Nadia is talking about here, and this is a great call, Nadia, and I appreciate you drawing our attention to it. She's talking about something that's called the New Way Forward Act. There are 44 members of the House of Representatives that actually have signed onto this thing. It's been in front of Congress for about 2 months, but the media is ignoring it because this is a dream immigration bill for socialists, and they don't want to be, they know socialism is bad. They know that the American people don't want a socialist president, so they try to minimize the radical things that Bernie is for. But this New Way Forward bill has really been written for the express purpose of helping foreign-born criminals live in the United States. It would allow people who have committed serious felonies in other countries to move here legally. We would be a refuge for serious felons from all over the world. Thanks for the call, Nadia. God bless you. Have a great weekend. Love on your wife or your husband. We'll see you on Monday.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American